Well, his claim that all of reality is like a little hologram, and each little piece looks like the whole, and that's all God within everything. So I know he's a neo-pagan. So I know he's wrong in his worldview based on what I know from the Bible. And then what he's talking about as far as the science of all this stuff, he's still going around using a hockey stick that's already been debunked. Now, I don't have to be a scientist to know using debunked data makes somebody not credible. Exactly. Okay, so why do I think these two guys are credible? Because I know what they're saying is true based on not my knowledge of climatology, but my knowledge of how differential equations work and how complex systems work, because I studied that in chemical engineering. Mm-hmm. And if you have too many variables, too many inputs, and variables that may change and influence one another, you create a level of complexity that is impossible for anybody to analyze and put a handle on. And they're just saying that. They're saying this is impossible to know. And they even quote from the footnotes of these big UN documents where they're, in lingo that non-scientists don't understand, mm-hmm. that when you have these differential equations that are linked, that influence one another, and all these variables, you can't know. You can't even make a theory out of it.
Well, you couldn't possibly.
Okay, now let me just read a little section from their book. It's a little longer quote, but let me just read this and show you why I believe that these guys are credible.
Okay.
Now, they're just talking about all the data that gets thrown out when people are trying to figure out future climate, mm-hmm. and all of the variables that are influential in what makes up what we call climate. So let me quote.
Okay.
Quote, this is from page 95, taken by storm. We can talk about how the oceans interact with the land, the exotic thermodynamic properties of ice compared to other solids that make it possible to skate and ski, and also for glaciers to flow, making them the subject of wonderful mystery and unpredictability. We could talk about the land surface air interactions and how we not only have to think about flow over land of different heights, but around buildings, through forests, past every leaf. We could talk about the ever so important first kilometer of air above the ground and ocean, and all of the rich chemistry that goes on in the air and the ground, the gases emitted by the soil and volcanoes, the gases absorbed and lost, the chemicals that rain cleans out of the air, the fluid-solid interactions of river, and we haven't even arrived at butterflies or seagulls or the family dog, for that matter. There's just incredible complexity. So using critical thinking, all right, when you have almost an infinite number of possible variables, all of which could influence climate, it's obvious to me that the little bit of CO2, which the amount contributed by humans compared to all the CO2 that comes and goes through processes that are already here, which, depending on whose number you're looking at, the people that believe in global warming will say it's 17%. The people that don't say it's 3% or 5%. But whatever the case, carbon dioxide is only one tiny little bit.
Minuscule.
Of this, minuscule part of this whole picture. Now, I can understand that. Yeah, I studied math science, but I'm a theologian, not a scientist. But I understand how you do critical thinking. And I also realize how you're deceived when you don't do critical thinking.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Critical thinking, what a concept.
Well,
it is everything in these days of deception.
Yeah.
I believe critical thinking as a practice with most human beings in America.
Yeah.
I've decided to let someone else do my thinking. I'll get behind Al Gore because I like Al Gore, and I think I'll agree with him. I'm going to join the majority on this because I don't want to be one of those people out on the fringe.
Yeah, it was the failure to think about all the things you need to know to reach a rational decision on an important topic.
I'm no genius, but I know enough to know to look at all sides of an issue. Critical thinking.
That's true for anything.
Question what you hear.
Yeah, let me give you an example, all right? Just today in the paper, Minneapolis Star and Tribune, mm-hmm. there was an article about a guy who claimed to be an apostle who had bilked people out of millions of dollars, and he's going on trial.
How about that?
Okay. Now, how did he bilk all these people out of millions of dollars? Well, he and this guy above him had a Ponzi scheme going where you tell people they can make unbelievable, they were promising 6% a month at a time when you can't even get 3% a year, trying to save your money.
Sounds
right?
like a heck of a deal.
Yeah. Okay. So what they do is they'd get people to sign up, and then the first few that do, they'd actually pay out that much money.
Mm-hmm.
And then those people tell their friends, look at this, here's my check, here's the money I got. Okay? And then they get a huge pyramid going, and these guys are bilking people from millions. They were cashing in their life insurance policies, putting second mortgages on their homes, taking anything they get a hands on and giving it to this apostle.
Yikes.
And he runs off with their money. They're broke, and now the guy's probably going to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, what is going on is a lack of critical thinking.
People saw the promised land, an easy buck.
Yeah, they're making their decisions by non-rational means. That's what I mean.
Well, what they felt, it made them feel good.
Well, they don't stop and think that we're living in an economy where you put your money in the money market right now, you can't even get 3% interest. These guys got some process that it's going to yield 8% a month.
I've not read the story, but was there the name it, claim it behind it? Was that sort of theology behind it?
Well, because the guy called himself an apostle, he obviously claims he's speaking for God.
That's what I want to get at. Did folks understand that to mean, well, it's a Christian thing.
Yeah,
why would he rip me off?
The Christians are the ones that get ripped off, and I've heard about this I don't know how many times in my lifetime, where whole churches are ripped off by a Ponzi scheme because they're not using critical thinking. They're going on blind faith. All right? I don't ask anybody to go on blind faith, and when I preach the gospel, I don't ask them to have blind faith. I tell people that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead before credible witnesses, and I believe in apologetics, and I believe in evidence. You should look. Is there any reason to believe the Christian claim? Okay? But when people are selling blind faith, they're telling you to shut off your critical thinking capabilities.
Right.
All right? So believe this. Why? Because, this is really important. If you keep driving your pickup truck, we're going to have catastrophes that the world has never known, and you're going to be contributing to it because you drove your pickup truck to work.
You'll leave your children with a world similar to what we'd find in the Mad Max series of movies. Post-apocalyptic
Everything's
wasteland.
going to be terrible. Yeah, because humans are going about doing what humans do, which is make carbon dioxide. So this critical thinking is how you can read several books from different perspectives and come to the conclusion of who's telling you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Essex and McKendrick aren't telling me they know what the climate's going to be 10 years from now. They're telling me they don't know, and neither does anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Using critical thinking, that's a believable claim because I can understand how complex climate is.
Really, what you need to understand is that very fact, how unbelievably complex it is, and there is no simple answer.
Yes.
Sorry, Al, there's no simple answer.
Exactly. The sun could start spewing out more sunspots and flares that send more heat our way.
Right.
There could be more dissolved particles floating around in the air, reflecting heat away from the earth. There could be more water vapor, which we got to talk about, which keeps heat. There's all kinds of things going on, including ocean currents, airflow across land, and all this stuff they're talking about. So two guys tell me, here's all the variables, which we know to be variables. We can't put this all together and predict the climate. And you can't take one small variable, CO2, and make it the whole. That's credible. Global warming, based on humans going about doing what they do, is not credible, and I don't believe it, and I think it's the biggest scam since the Ponzi chain letter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know about you. What I read on the web, I see a lot of science articles from the BBC and newspapers and dailies from across the globe. They're telling us, and NASA and science has discovered this, the temperature on Mars also is increasing.
Well, yeah, because they could see that the CO2, there's frozen.
There's an ice cap, a giant ice cap.
It's not water, though.
No.
But it's shrinking. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I saw a billboard. I mentioned this in my article. We were driving back.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we were driving back from up north, and here's this billboard. It says, the ice caps on Mars are shrinking. Are humans causing it, and then it was advertising their website. And in their book, they mention a fact that there was some scientist somewhere that wrote an article in a journal using the fact that the ice caps on Mars are shrinking to suggest that changes in the sun's output of energy is a bigger factor, if there is indeed global warming, than anything else that's going on.
Certainly.
And the other people that interacted with these ideas called him a contrarian.